Okay. Reproductive. We're still in the male reproductive anatomy, looking at the duct system. We are finished with the testis for now. Testis anatomy. So the duct system, we start with the ductus deferens at the tail of the epididymis. It heads up through the spermatic cord, loops over the pubic bone, then heads backwards, loops over the ureter, turns down, and joins a little duct from one of the glands that we'll talk about, the seminal vesicles, to form the ejaculatory duct. And then that is really short, and inside the prostate gland, it joins the urethra from the urinary bladder. And from there on out, it's the urethra that conveys the sperm to the outside. In this view here, this is a posterior view, figure 27.5. Off the duct system, you can see how the two ductus deferens come across the ureter and converge behind and under the urinary bladder to lead into the urethra. The seminal vesicles we'll talk about, the prostate right here, we'll talk about. They all contribute to the manufacture of semen, and so they'll have openings from the prostate here. There are a couple of more glands, the bulbourethral glands, they'll open somewhere down here, and there's the label. And the urethra then continues to the outside. So since we were looking at a picture of the penis, we might as well do that anatomy now. In humans, the penis is erected by using erectile tissues that fill with blood upon nervous system stimulation. We have 3 erectile bodies in the male penis. 2 are called corpus cavernosum. So here's the plural, corpora cavernosa is the plural, right there. And they're the 2 dorsal ones, and then there's a midventral one called the corpus spongiosum. And you can remember that one because that has the urethra running right through the middle of it. So the corpus spongiosum has the urethra. The corpus spongiosum also forms the enlarged tip of the penis. The enlarged tip is called the glans. Not gland, glans. So that's not a typo. It does end in an S. The glans. And the glans is covered by the prepuce, the foreskin, unless a baby was circumcised. So that's the part that gets cut off when babies are circumcised, this foreskin or prepuce. The erectile tissues basically are what attaches the penis to the rest of the body. They have these areas here called the crus of these 2 corpora cavernosa. Each one has a crus. And the crus, they don't show it on here in this diagram, but the crus attaches to the pelvic bone. So the pelvic bone attaches the penis by these 2 areas in the root area. The root is the part that's inside the body. So I think that's all for structure on the penis that we need to do. So 2 corpora cavernosa, 1 corpus spongiosum, that's the one with the urethra right through the middle of it. And the erectile tissues in here, when you see this in lab, it's very irregular, spongy-looking material, a lot of connective tissue plus some smooth muscle. So it's a lot of connective tissue, stress collagen, that then the spaces fill with blood to produce an erection. Now to the accessory glands. The penis, male organ of copulation, you know that. To the accessory glands. The accessory glands produce fluids that most of which is released with ejaculation, with the sperm. A little bit of it is released before ejaculation. We'll talk about that. So we have 2 seminal vesicles, one on each side, one for each vas deferens. Seminal gland, they start calling it now for some reason, I have no idea why. And they produce about 60% of the ejaculate volume is fluid from the seminal vesicles or seminal glands. And sperm and seminal vesicle or seminal gland secretion mix in the ejaculatory duct. And that's also very soon then they get joined by secretions from the prostate. The prostate, there's just one gland. The prostate directly surrounding the urethra, directly inferior to the urinary bladder, and it produces about 30% of the seminal fluid, 33, somewhere in there. And the fluids produced by the seminal glands and the prostate gland are thought to have multiple functions. One is to keep the sperm healthy and alive, but also to condition the female reproductive tract and make it more receptive. The female tract is pretty inhospitable to foreign life, which basically the sperm are. Because the vagina is open to the environment, you don't want bacteria and anything just to be able to live in there, so it's a pretty inhospitable environment, which is also inhospitable to sperm. So sperm comes with all this fluid packed with it that will neutralize a lot of that acidity, for example, in the vagina. So the secretions are alkaline and make the female system more receptive. The secretions also allow the sperm to make it through the cervix into the uterus, which they'll have to do. Fertilization doesn't occur in the vagina. It occurs far higher up, so the sperm has to move through the bottom opening of the uterus actually into the woman's body, and that tends to be plugged up by mucus. And these fluids allow that mucus to get a little thinner and make it a little easier for sperm to actually make it up there. So a lot of the volume of the ejaculate is seminal gland and the prostate gland. A relatively minor component is the actual sperm. And then we have these bulbourethral glands. They actually release their secretion, which is fairly clear-looking stuff before ejaculation, and that is to clean the urethra. Since this is used for both urinary as well as reproductive functions, the urethra may have remnants of urine in it, and the bulbourethral gland secretions come out before ejaculation, a clear fluid to clean that out and make it more hospitable to the sperm. And then we see this picture again for the accessory glands. So here you see the seminal vesicles coming in right at the top of the prostate, and then the prostate secretions come in right there. And by the way, you see why an enlarged prostate as men get older would interfere with urination, right? You've seen the ads on TV, wanting to go, not being able to, stopping and starting, that kind of deal. Urinary issues with men once they get into their 50s tend to get more common, and it's because of these prostate gland enlargements that is fairly frequent. So here are all the glands, seminal vesicles, prostate, and then the 2 bulbourethral glands. There are the openings for those for cleaning out the urethra. So the ejaculate or semen then is sperm plus all these accessory gland secretions. Sperm plus accessory gland secretions. Functions, transport, protection, activation of sperm. Making the female system more receptive, neutralizing acidity, that mucus, thinning that mucus at the cervix. It also triggers peristalsis in the female tract to kind of suck sperm up. And average numbers for ejaculation about 2 to 5 milliliters, and sperm numbers can be really variable. So here you have a ballpark estimate for sperm numbers. Okay, so lots of sperm per ejaculation, even though it takes just one. We'll talk about that in another chapter. Okay, so now we'll do the anatomy of the female. I just think it works better that way. So when we talk about sperm production, egg production, there are a lot of similarities and differences we want to highlight. Instead of doing sperm now, then doing anatomy, then doing eggs. So we'll do female anatomy now, so it skips a few pages in the book probably, unless you rearranged it again. Sometimes I don't keep track of this so well. Here's the equivalent overview picture for the female. So a mid-sagittal view, pubic bone, again, is a landmark. Now, in the female, right away what you'll notice is that there's a complete separation of urinary and reproductive functions. So here's the urinary bladder with the urethra in the female opening separately from the reproductive vagina right there, leading to the other reproductive structures. So there's no double usage right there. The female gonad is the ovary. We have 2 ovaries, one on each side. They stay up in the body cavity. Unlike the male testes, they do not move around. They stay up there. We'll look at ovary structure, and then we have a duct system also that you could say where the ovary sheds eggs into this thing. Your book calls it the uterine tube. You probably know it as the fallopian tubes, same thing. And we'll look at the parts of these uterine tubes, how they come together to form the uterus, where the baby's actually implanted, or not the baby, the fertilized or early embryo really technically implants and then develops. And then we'll move to the outside through the vagina, the birth canal, and female organ of copulation. So we'll start with the gonad, just like in the male, the ovary. So here is a picture of an ovary, kind of overstained. This book likes to put slides that have almost too much color on it for some reason. It's really tough to make out what's going on because of that. Ovaries are actually pretty small. Humans don't have 50 litters of 15 or anything like that. So we have small ovaries because we only produce 1 egg a month. If you look at vertebrates that have thousands of babies, like fish, they will have giant ovaries, right? Their whole body cavity is one big giant ovary. But we have really tiny ovaries when you think about it. They're only about the size of an almond, maybe, at the most. What you will see are, you can't see it on here, so it's kind of annoying, little structures of various sizes. Some big ones you can see, but all the little ones you can't make out in those pictures of follicles, structures that ripen eggs. And it's probably better to go to a different one later when we look at so I'm not going to talk a lot about that right now because that picture is so poor. But we'll go back to what types of follicles there are and how that happens in the physiology part. So there'll be a little more on ovary structure then. The duct system is illustrated in 14 here, figure 14. So here are the ovaries. This is actually a better picture because it's a drawing of the ovary. And here's this uterine tube, one on each side. And they lead into a common uterus in the middle. The fallopian tubes or uterine tubes have several parts you should know. You should know about the infundibulum. The infundibulum is the expanded part. Here you see it not cut open. It actually means funnel, so it kind of wraps around part of the ovary. The infundibulum has these little extensions called the fimbriae, and during ovulation, the fimbriae actually sweep across the surface of the ovary to make sure the egg makes it into the uterine tube and doesn't get lost in the body cavity, which does happen. It's tough to estimate how many get lost in the body cavity because you can't track them. But sometimes they can actually even get fertilized and be in the body cavity and implant on the outside of the reproductive tract. That's called an ectopic pregnancy. So we know they get lost. And how many is really tough to say because their eggs are really small. And you can't track what happens. So you can't, examine menstrual flow and look for eggs because at that point they wouldn't be discernible. So you don't know how many actually make it in here and how many get lost. So infundibulum, the funnel, fimbriae, the little finger-like things attached to it or part of it that try and catch the egg. Then we have this bend. The bend is the ampulla. You should know that because this is where fertilization occurs, in the ampulla, this bent area. So sperm actually has to make it quite a long way. Fertilization all the way up in the ampulla. And then the rest is, you don't have to know isthmus. Then it goes down into the uterus. The human or primate uterus is actually kind of unusual. It's one of very few animals where we just have one midline uterus with one opening, one cervix. It's much more common in other mammals to have two uteruses that come off like a Y. Dogs, cats, everything pretty much has this Y-shaped uterus. It's only primates and armadillos, for some strange reason, that have this one common uterus in the middle. So if any of you are going into veterinary medicine, this is not what you're going to see. So it's kind of unusual, and maybe it relates to our few young, I don't know. I've not read anything about it, why the primate uterus is one of the very few that are like this. So we have one midline uterus. The uterus is really thick-walled. Even when you're not pregnant, it's pretty thick. Most of the wall is this myometrium. This is all very thick, smooth muscle. The myometrium's thick, smooth muscle. And that makes up the majority of the uterus. And then the inside lining of it is called the endometrium. The endometrium. This is the part that actually changes with the monthly cycles of mature females, mature women after puberty. And part of that endometrium, unless there's a pregnancy, gets shed during menstruation at the end of every cycle. This perimetrium that they mention here, this is just serosa covering everything. Okay, the perimetrium. This is serosa that covers all the organs, including the uterus. Now, for uterine wall, I have or let me finish this down here. The part of the uterus that sort of pokes into the vagina a little bit. This is the cervix. It has a cervical canal. It's most of the time this is plugged up with very thick mucus, so that if you're not anywhere near being able to have an ovulation or an egg present for fertilization, this is plugged up because it is open to the body cavity, right? So there's always that potential of infectious organisms getting up there. So the cervical canal usually is not open, it's plugged up. Okay? That then leads into the vagina. So the next picture should be more uterus close-up. There we go. So here's the uterus, but only pretty much showing the endometrium of the uterus. So there's just a very little myometrium shown in lab. Hopefully you still have these slides. The myometrium makes up much more thickness than the endometrium. So it's probably at least 3 times as thick as the endometrium. Here they only show pretty much the endometrium. Now the endometrium, as I said, builds up and regresses throughout the monthly cycles in women, and the bottom part of it is called the stratum basalis, the bottom layer of the endometrium. That's the part that always stays behind. And then we have the functionalis, the functional layer up here. That's the part that builds up and is lost, and builds up and is lost, and builds up and is lost every month. So this functionalis is what's sloughed off during menstruation. Now, the vascularization of the uterus is pretty extensive, as you can imagine, since the function of it is to receive a fertilized embryo, early embryo fertilized, and nourish that until it can form a placenta, and then that will require a lot of blood supply. So the uterus is really well vascularized, including into the endometrium. So we have arteries and veins coming out, lots of blood vessels. And some of the arteries are really highly coiled, these spiral arteries, and at the onset of menstruation, the spiral arteries undergo a spasm. This is triggered by hormones, and they'll rupture, and then blood will seep in between the basalis and the functionalis and help remove the top bits. So menstrual flow is all this tissue plus actual blood. So it's not just pure blood or anything like that. It's the tissue of the functionalis plus blood that helps rupture it away. Glands, also uterine glands, or you can call them endometrial glands. These are all the sort of the bigger spaces in here. They secrete material that will sustain an early embryo as it comes down and looking around for somewhere to implant. So it will actually take a while for implantation of an embryo to occur and for a placenta to set up and so on. So these uterine glands have nourishing secretions in early pregnancy. So every time as the stratum functionalis builds up again, the spiral arteries grow out and rebuild these blood vessels out here. So it takes quite a bit of energy and calories and all that to build that back up every month. And I don't have a picture of the myometrium. It looks really irregular, very crazy arrangement, not like what you had in the intestine, where you had layers, circular, longitudinal layers. This is all crazy mixed smooth muscle. It looks almost swirly, again overstained, you can't really tell what's going on. And it's pretty easy to tell because of that. It doesn't look like anything else. The myometrium, its function is obviously during the birthing process to expel the baby, the strong contractions. Okay, moving down into the vagina, then the female organ of copulation, as I said, completely separate from the urethra. very distensible. It's usually collapsed, so it's not like the trachea or anything held open. The moist environment, stratified squamous epithelium. You could probably, if you thought about it, come up with that yourself for friction, right? Withstanding friction of sexual intercourse. You need the stratified squamous there for sure. But it's non-keratinizing because it's a moist environment. Ridges in here, potentially for stimulation of the penis. And I already said, highly distensible when you think about childbirth, right? So it can really stretch out if given the time. Overall, the environment in the vagina is fairly acidic, thought to discourage microorganisms from leading to infection. And there are mucus-producing glands near the cervix that keep everything nice and moist at all times. It needs to stay a moist, acidic environment to stay healthy. So it's generally a terrible idea to try and clean the inside of the vagina. That used to, I don't know if that's as popular anymore, but it used to be really popular for girls and women to douche, use these products to clean the vagina. That really interferes with the normal conditions that should be in there, you may be much more prone to getting infections, including yeast infections, if you use those products. So it's not a good idea. Unless a doctor tells you you have a condition that warrants it, I recommend not doing that. So it should stay nice and acidic in the vagina. And as we heard, the seminal fluid has ways to deal with that. And nothing else should be able to deal with it. All right. And the external genitalia are the vulva. We can look right here on the right first, because there's actually some similarity in the male and the female with the parts. They're different sizes, but the female has erectile tissues just like the male penis. So when we look at this is basically dissecting all the superficial skin away and fat. Anterior is towards the top. So you have the pubic symphysis, and here is basically a tiny little penis. The clitoris, it has a glans, the tip of the clitoris, and this is literally developmentally the same as the male penis. It just doesn't grow big in women. It has all the nerve endings in the clitoris actually way more than the male glands of the penis. It has erectile tissues in it containing corpora cavernosa, you see. It attaches to the pubic bone, just like the penis does. There's a crus of the clitoris. So it's literally a miniature penis. Obviously, it doesn't have a urethra in it. The urethra is separate, and then behind it, the vaginal orifice. And then we have here, these areas. This is also erectile in nature. This is tissue that occupies the labia internally, during sexual excitement they become engorged with blood too and swell up. And then we have glands. Here are these greater vestibular glands, ducts opening right there near the vagina for lubrication to facilitate sexual intercourse. Here, opening of the duct of the greater vestibular glands right there. The labia are of two kinds. They're the outer labia majora and then the inner labia minora. So two sets of folds surrounding the vaginal orifice. And here you see the vestibule is this whole area there. And the labia majora are actually, as we'll see, equivalent to the male scrotum. And they develop from the same precursor tissues as the male scrotum. And we'll look at that a little bit later because I think it's interesting. I don't usually do all this developmental stuff, but I think it's kind of neat how you start in boys and girls very early with a condition where everybody looks the same, and then you take the same precursor tissues and here you make boys and here you make girls from the same stuff. But we'll get to that later. So the vulva are the external genitalia. And then in women, we also have the breasts or mammary glands for milk production to nourish an infant. The breasts are completely external to the pectoralis muscles, so they're basically part of the hypodermis. They're sitting in the skin, in the hypodermis, so you have lots of fat. If you remember hypodermis, right? Lots of fat, and then you have the glandular tissues here in this darker brown color. What they show here is really extensive glandular tissue. This much glandular tissue you'd only get in a very actively lactating breast after the baby's born. You're nursing a baby, that's how much you would have. Ordinarily, unless you're nursing a baby, even if you're pregnant, you're not going to have this much glandular tissues. These tissues develop during pregnancy to get ready for lactation, but they don't really expand until after the baby is done and the baby actually nurses. So you'll have some growth in these for sure during pregnancy, but then the big growth comes from nursing an infant, and that starts milk production. We'll talk about how that happens. It's sort of a positive feedback mechanism. So the glandular parts, this is obviously an exocrine gland, right? So it has a duct. All these different lobes have milk ducts coming out of them, and the milk ducts open at the nipple externally. So here we have opening of lactiferous duct or milk duct, and the baby's nursed from the nipple, and milk comes out from these ducts. There are small storage areas, these sinuses behind it, and milk is expressed from the breast by contraction of smooth muscle-like tissues in the glandular parts. They're not technically smooth muscle, but they function like smooth muscle, contracting around these milk-making lobes and squeezing the milk out. The breasts are really not held on by much, just skin really. So here we have skin, some connective tissues in here, suspensory ligament, and over the years this stretches, and if you have multiple babies it will stretch more, and that's why breasts head south as you get older, because they're not really held on by anything but skin, and like the rest of your skin, gravity has an effect over time. Okay, so now this little bit of developmental part that I thought is just kind of interesting. We have genetic sex determination, that females are XX, males are XY, nothing new, right? And what we have in sex determination developmentally, it's genes that are residing on the male Y chromosome that turn a baby into the male pattern, and the absence of a Y chromosome means you'll get female developmental conditions, and you develop ovaries and uteruses and that kind of thing. So it's the Y chromosome that determines maleness, absence of Y, femaleness. Now, early on, and this is at the back of the chapter, in page 23, you have early embryos still 5 to 6 weeks in. You have the rudiments of limb formation. You have a tail still at that stage. And so you're looking sort of at the belly, the head and rudimentary forelimbs or arms are up there. And everybody looks the same at this early stage of development. We have a kidney that is only an embryonic kidney. It's not the one you have as you get older and you're born. And that's these sort of salmon-colored structure, the mesonephros. This is an embryonic kidney only. Here's your final kidney starting to grow out. So it's kind of strange in and of itself. It's actually an evolutionary holdover from more primitive animals. So we have this transitory kidney that stays around during part of our development until we have our final kidneys. But this mesonephric kidney is still important even in us because it starts making a duct, here called the Wolffian duct, this one, that will be important if you happen to have a Y chromosome. And then right next to this embryonic kidney, you form another duct, para-mesonephric. Para means next to. The mesonephric duct or Müllerian duct. And this is one that will be important to you if you have 2 X chromosomes. So at this early stage, these embryos are in a sexually indifferent stage, meaning you cannot tell by looking at it externally or internally if this is going to be a boy or a girl, sexually indifferent, and you have ducts that are for male and for female usage later on. So this kidney duct, this Wolffian duct, will be used by males. The Müllerian duct will be used by females. Early on, everybody has both. Isn't that odd? Now then, pretty soon the Y chromosome genetic material, the genes on the Y chromosome start expressing themselves. Here, SRY means sex-determining region of the Y. So genes on the Y chromosome. So this means having a Y chromosome that's functional. This means no Y chromosome, i.e. female, XX. If you have a Y chromosome, that Y chromosome will produce a hormone ultimately. I mean, there are several steps, but the Y chromosome ultimately results in the production of this hormone, anti-Müllerian hormone, and this hormone will get rid of the female plumbing in this embryo. So we're at week 7 to 8, male embryo, anti-Müllerian hormone is being produced because he has a Y chromosome, and this anti-Müllerian hormone destroys the Müllerian duct, which would become a fallopian tube and uterus. Okay, so the Y chromosome has genes that, when they become expressed properly, result in the production of anti-Müllerian hormone that gets rid of the female part of the plumbing. And then at birth, you have only male plumbing, and the testes around birth have descended into the scrotum, pulling the duct with it. So I should have pointed this out before. You see where the testes are early on, right? Up there, they don't show the body, but in the body. Kind of where the ovaries stay. The testes start out there too, and you have, you know, what you would expect with the duct. And then towards term, they descend down into the scrotum and pull the duct with it down into it. Now the female development, so here we have a female fetus. Now without the Y chromosome, We don't make anti-Müllerian hormone, meaning we don't destroy the early fallopian tube duct, so we're keeping the female duct system. And this female duct, paramesonephric duct, will form the uterine tube or fallopian tube. Its distal parts will fuse to form the uterus, and you get your female system. The male duct will eventually degenerate. It takes a little bit longer until the kidney is fully functional, the permanent kidney, because this has been used by the embryonic kidney to avoid excretions. And we still, even in the adult, have remnants of the mesonephric duct in the mesenteries that suspend the ovaries. Little bits, you'd have to look really carefully to see it, but people have identified them. So we're getting rid of the male plumbing eventually in the female. So absence of a Y chromosome leads to the female development. And externally, there's the finished female, so ovaries stay up in the body. Externally, we also have sexually indifferent stages. Again, very early, at about 5 weeks. Now we're looking at it butt on more instead of from the belly. Cut the tail off, here are leg buds. And we have color coding here. We have a genital tubercle, a urethral groove where the urethra comes out, and an anus, labioscrotal swellings. And at this stage, you cannot tell externally if this is going to be a boy or a girl. For the male development, what happens is you're basically sipping up along the midline. Things come together in the midline. The urethral folds come together. The opening moves towards the tip of the genital tubercle, which will be the glands of the penis. It fuses up, it seals, and usually the urethral opening is in the proper spot. And the labioscrotal swellings also come towards the midline, and they'll form the scrotum where the testis will move down into. There are conditions in male babies where the urethral opening is not in the terminal part of the penis, where this sipping up is not happening correctly. It's called hypospadia. Sorry, I didn't put it on there. Hypo, H-Y-P-O, and then spadia, S-P-A-D-I-A. Just like how you would say it, hypospadia. And the urethral opening can be just displaced a little bit within the glands, and it can be as far back as down here. So there are all kinds of gradations, and that can be surgically fixed. Hypospadia. So from improper fusion. And in the female, the genital tubercle becomes the clitoris, basically. The labioscrotal swellings become the labia majora. The urethral folds become the labia minora. And basically you're not sipping things up in the female as opposed to in the male externally. And all of this triggered by having a Y chromosome, so the default is the female pattern. Here's the descent of the testis, which for some reason they took out of the book. Just want to show it in a different view. So why is it the way it is? Because it's heading across the pubic bone into the scrotum. There's a tissue that guides it, the gubernaculum. Pulling it down, it pulls the body cavity with it, and eventually this will close up. And this takes quite a while for that to grow shut. So if you have a baby boy, you'll notice for quite a while how that stays open. Because when they laugh, you have pressure changes in the abdomen. And then they suck up and down. I don't mean anything by it. You can see it. It's cute. So it's not completely... My son is 3.5 and it's still happening. So it's not fused completely. But eventually it does. And this is then the weak spot in that groin area where men tend to get hernias. And so this is a good point to stop. So Y chromosome, having it or not, determines maleness, male formation. What I don't have to tell, there are conditions, obviously, that some of you may have heard of individuals that have one X chromosome and nothing, XO, Turner syndrome, they look female because they don't have a Y chromosome. If you have a Y chromosome, even extra ones, you still look male. So it's really having that Y chromosome or not that determines maleness or female. Okay.